we continue. Now this arrest of Jesus shows us the effect of the prayer. Even as Jesus had predicted that the betrayer was at hand, once again, because Mark does not want us to forget, and also because Mark wants to stress that even a close disciple could betray, and how betrayal and denial are at the heart of every disciple. They come with swords and clubs. Only John will say they come with lanterns and torches, because John wants to stress that they come with artificial light represented by lanterns and torches to arrest Jesus, who is the true light. And so the prayer of Jesus is now, in a way, will be seen how exactly Jesus responds, even though, notice, he has not received an answer from God in prayer. Judas had given them a sign because Jerusalem would likely have been crowded with many people. It was also likely that Judas knew that at least there would be the other 11 with Jesus, and those who came to arrest him would not really have known possibly who Jesus was. So the kiss was a social greeting, and also largely between rabbis and disciples. As soon as they come with their swords and clubs, one of those, as we saw, only John tells us it was Simon Peter. John tells us it was the right ear. Luke also tells us it was the right ear. But Mark and Matthew do not tell us which ear. And Mark will tell us it was one of those. He doesn't even say it was a disciple, while Luke and Matthew possibly. Luke, where the ear is healed, unlike in Matthew, where the one is told, put your sword back in its scabbard. Do you not think that I can ask my Father? He will send 12 legions of angels. In John, put your sword back in its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup the Father has given me? In Mark alone is Jesus silent. And the reason for this silence is because Jesus now, after this prayer, has been so strengthened, has been so fortified, has been so focused that he is unaware of anything. He is not even aware that Judas has kissed him, because in all the other three, he responds to Judas's kiss. In Mark, he gives no response at all to the kiss of Judas. In all the other three Gospels, he responds to the fight in the garden. In Mark, he gives no response at all, except to say, let the scriptures be fulfilled. And what is the meaning of let the scriptures be fulfilled? It means let God's will be done. The prayer of Jesus was not my will, but yours. And now he shows that in action. This is the beginning of Mark telling us that every single disciple deserted him and fled. At the introduction, I had spoken about the Gospel of Mark being a gospel in which Jesus is abandoned totally. This is the beginning of that abandonment. All of them deserted him and fled. And Mark will make this even more striking when Mark alone has this scene of the young man who is not to be identified with the young man at the tomb. There is no connection at all, except that both are young men. But this man is to show the total abandonment, where a person who comes out possibly to see the situation, sees how challenging and how terrible it is, leaves the loincloth and runs away naked. This is now where Mark will bring us his last sandwich construction, where Peter follows Jesus and denies Jesus, and in between is the trial before the Sanhedrin. Mark wants to indicate here the fidelity of Jesus when compared with the infidelity of Peter. So they took Jesus to the high priest, and all, notice again, Mark is very clearly using these terms for a very specific reason. All the chief priests, elders, and scribes were assembled. Matthew and John will tell us that the high priest was named Caiaphas. They took him now to the high priest. And Peter follows at a distance, but does not, in a way, go in where Jesus is going. In the case of Jesus, however, the chief priest, notice, and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death. And many gave false testimony. Now, this question, which he had talked about destroying the temple, is a Johannine text. Destroy this temple, and I will build it up in 3 days. But it is likely that when Jesus spoke about the destruction of the temple in the eschatological discourse, it is possible that that is what they may have been referring to, though there seems here a connection between the 3 days which John talks about. In Mark, Jesus had never explicitly spoken that he would destroy the temple, but he had said that the temple would be destroyed. And so therefore, the testimony is false. The high priest then, being the person in charge, asks Jesus for a response. And then he asks him the all-important question connected with the command to silence, connected with the messianic secret, connected with the answer of Peter. And the question is, are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? Are you the anointed one and the Son of the Blessed One? To avoid talking of God, this is possibly why Son of the Blessed One. The only time in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus accepts this title is here in 1462. And even though Jesus says, I am the divine name, he refers to the divine name as the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power. And the power here refers to God. So now, there is no need for a command to silence. This is exactly the kind of Messiah I've come to be. And you will see the Son of Man after his death, after his resurrection, seated at the right hand of the power. The tearing of clothes of the high priest is a sign of great grief, of mourning at some blasphemy. And notice again, the second time, Mark has said, all of them, and therefore we must remember, including Joseph of Arimathea, who later on Mark will tell us was a member of the council. Mark is saying to us who will be attentively reading his gospel that even Joseph of Arimathea consented to his death. That's why later he will tell us he boldly asked Pilate, boldly. There requires a boldness to have a conversion, to have a change of mind, a change of heart. All of them condemned him as deserving death. So not a single voice raised in his protest. The guards continue to ask him to prophesy now. And the mocking is exactly the kind of Messiah that Jesus has come to be. In the meantime, Mark continues with what happens with Peter. After Mark told us that Peter was below in the courtyard, Mark will talk about the first denial, where only a servant girl mentions Peter as being with Jesus. So Peter will leave the warmth of the fire because he doesn't want to be caught. A second time, a bystander says to him, or the servant girl says to the bystander, and again he denied it. So the servant girl first told him, now she includes others. So the identification even more sure. And third time, one of the bystanders. So that means it's not a servant girl now, it's somebody else. You are one of them, for you are a Galilean. And many interpret this verse where Peter swore an oath to think that Peter was swearing against Jesus. Because the next verse, I do not know this man you are talking about. At that moment, the cock crowed. Mark will remember for the second time. Matthew and Luke and John will have the cock crowed because they don't mention about the cock crowing twice. The cock crowed for the second time. And Peter remembered the words. And all the Gospels make the connection between Peter denying and then weeping. Only Luke will tell us about that look which Jesus gave Peter, and will tell us of how Peter wept because of that look. This is now the trial before the Romans. Pilate appears for the first time in the story, and he was regarded as the procurator, the one who was in charge to keep order, make sure that there were no problems. When they take Jesus before Pilate, the question is not religious. Before the Sanhedrin, it was a religious question, that is about the temple. And it also was a question about whether Jesus was Son of God, Son of the Blessed One. Here it is political. Are you the king of the Jews? So Pilate is concerned with politics. And the response of Jesus, you say so, is that your choice of words. So on the surface level, I am, but that is not all that I am. And that's why you say so. And after this, accusations are made. But Jesus refuses to respond because he sees in Pilate, he possibly was able to see in Pilate someone who would be swayed. So when he asks whether Jesus has got no answer to make, Jesus remains silent. The word taumazo, which is used here for amazement, seems to indicate Pilate was impressed, taken up with Jesus. And this is the reason why he brings in, even though this particular tradition is not mentioned outside the Gospels, but there are many who think that if it was not true, then Mark and even the other evangelists would not really have mentioned it. So there was possibly something, though the details are not clear, of what would happen at the Passover. But because the festive occasion, it is very likely that this kind of concessions may have been granted. But outside the canonical gospel, we do not find any mention of this in the history. So Barabbas is mentioned here, and Barabbas in Matthew is called Jesus Barabbas. Bar is son, Abba is father. So by using this term Barabbas, who was in prison and who was possibly a historical figure, the evangelists are also saying that the son of a father, that means every human being, because everyone is the son of a father or the daughter of the father, every human being is saved because of Jesus, and Jesus goes to his death. Jesus Barabbas is saved. Jesus, son of a father, is saved. And so they come and ask for Barabbas. Again, Pilate, because he possibly was impressed with Jesus, notice, asked them, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? So he wants to release Jesus. And then Mark tells us, however, the crowd is incited to ask for Barabbas. Again, Pilate makes an attempt. Then what do you wish me to do? And they tell him what they want, because the Roman way of killing a person was to crucify. The Jewish way was to stone the person. So the Roman way is crucifying. And then again Pilate asked, what is the evil they do not answer? Because blasphemy may not have carried weight. If they had said he blasphemed, it would not have carried weight. In John's gospel, you might remember, they bring in also the political problem when they say he makes himself equal to Caesar. Then Pilate gets his antenna up. But here, if they said he made himself Son of God, he wouldn't really concern himself so much, because his concern was political. So without responding to the question of Pilate, why, what evil has he done, they simply reiterate their demand to crucify. And Pilate, wishing to satisfy, because he's unafraid, because he's afraid of not creating trouble, and the crowd could create trouble, he has Jesus crucified. So the soldiers lead him to what is known as the praetorium, that is called, in English we use the term, the governor's headquarters. And again, Mark will tell us the whole cohort, very unlikely to mean 600 soldiers. But what Mark is trying to indicate, that everyone, beginning with the disciples, moving on to the Sanhedrin, now the Romans, everyone is against Jesus. Not even a voice will be raised in his defense. The clothing in a purple robe, the crowning with thorns, is exactly what Jesus has come to be, and they do not realize it. The striking with the reed and the mixture of the mockery is basically what Jesus had spoken about, and that's why he commanded the demons to silence. He commanded others to silence, because this is the kind of Messiah that he wanted to be known as. Now there is no command to silence. Possibly in a gesture of dignity and giving back dignity to Jesus, they put his own clothes, because very often, in most cases, the prisoners who were led to the place of crucifixion were almost naked. Here, Mark tells us very specifically, so possibly to give back some dignity to Jesus, they put his own clothes on him. The compelling of Simon of Cyrene is because of the fact that the cross would have been too heavy, first of all, and after the flogging, it is very likely that Jesus may have been very, very weak. Some see that they gave a special dignity to Jesus by requesting somebody to help him. It is likely that Simon was known in the first Christian community, or at least his sons were known, Alexander and Rufus. This is the identification which Mark makes. Golgotha is the Hebrew Gulgulet, or the Aramaic Gulgulta, which simply means skull. Calvaria is the Latin term, and that's why we say sometimes Jesus was crucified on Calvary. If it is Hebrew, it is Golgotha. If it is Aramaic, it is Gulgulta. If it is English, it is the place of the skull. Wine and myrrh mixed together was seen as a delicacy. And so possibly this offer of wine mixed with myrrh, just the offer, was again mocking Jesus. Something that myrrh would be used to dull the pain, but that seems unlikely here, at least in the Gospel of Mark. The division of clothes, which is mentioned by all the Gospels, is in keeping with what the psalmist says in Psalm 22, which is the psalm which Jesus will quote in Mark and Matthew just before he breathes his last. The division of his garments, once again, Mark wants to indicate in keeping with what God had ordained. Mark mentions 3 times, and Mark mentions 3 groups. So 9 o'clock, when they crucified him, and the mention of the inscription is also by the other Gospels, the King of the Jews. John is the only one who will tell us that it was in 3 languages, by which John is trying to indicate the universal kingship of Jesus. The 2 bandits are mentioned by all the Gospels, but in Mark and in Matthew, there is no good thief. Both of them, later on we will see, also taunt him. And Mark will bring in now the scripture, actually, which he doesn't mention explicitly, which Luke mentions, as being crucified with lawless persons. That is the background of being crucified between two bandits. The three groups who deride him are the passers-by, and they invite him to come down and to build a temple. The second is the chief priests and the scribes, who again want a sign. They say that if he comes down now, they will see and believe. And notice in Mark, even those crucified with him. By bringing in these three groups once again, Mark is indicating the total and complete abandonment of Jesus. So from 9 o'clock to noon, there is now darkness when it was noon. And the darkness lasts for 3 hours. That is from noon till 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. So my God, Mark explains in Greek, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22 has these words in Aramaic. So 6 hours after he was placed on the cross, 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours of darkness, and then the death, Jesus feels abandoned by God. Some of them thought that when Jesus says Eloi, he's calling for Elijah. That's why Matthew has got Eli, Eli. And the mistake here is because, as we saw, Malachi 4:5, Elijah was to come before the Messiah. Wait, let us see if Elijah is coming down. And then they put to his lip sour wine, which was possibly cheap vinegar, which was the favorite beverage of the lower ranks of society and possibly also of the soldiers who were around. Jesus then gives a loud cry after feeling abandoned by his Father. Mark doesn't tell us what kind of a cry it was. He only tells us it was a loud cry, and then he breathes his last. Now, at the death, there are two significant events which explain both about the temple and about Son of God and King of Jews. The first is about the veil of the temple. The veil of the temple, the curtain of the temple, torn in two from top to bottom. So God acts, some say, to show what exactly the meaning of the death of Jesus is. So the veil here, the curtain, is that which enshrouded the veil of the temple being torn. Now there is direct access to God. There is no barrier between humans and God, which is the result of the death of Jesus. There are some who think that God has abandoned the temple. So God no longer is in the temple. If the veil is torn, then basically God is speaking and saying, I am no longer here. And therefore, some say now true worship is not in the temple, it is on the cross. And there are a number who argue for a link between the baptism, the schism. Basically, we remember schizmenoso, basically the rending of the heavens. Schizmenos, basically the rending open of the heavens, which is the same verb that Mark used at the baptism when the heavens were rent open, and now schizane. They see the connection. There, the heavens were rent open. Here, the veil is rent open. There, the Spirit came down. Here, Jesus dies on the cross. There, the voice from heaven spoke. Here, the voice from earth speaks. If that voice invited Jesus to be king servant, this voice pointing to the crucified Christ says, truly, this man was God's son. And what about the death of Jesus would have inspired this centurion? Some say it was the unnatural darkness out of the ordinary. Others say it was the last words of Jesus. Still others say it was the loud cry, which would be unusual to cry with such life in him. Whatever the reason might be, we can see that the centurion was inspired. So after the death, there are women who look on from a distance. And these women are, some of them mentioned as Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. These women are regarded as women who would follow him. Luke chapter 8, 1-3 talked about providing for him. Here, Mark will tell us also after the death of Jesus about these women disciples of Jesus. And so therefore, they saw what had happened. Now, evening has come because the death takes place at 3 o'clock. And it is the day of preparation. Notice, they said not during the festival, but almost during the festival, Jesus has died. So if the death of Jesus took place at 3 o'clock, Joseph would have wanted to bury the body because according to Deuteronomy, the corpse must not remain all night upon the tree. You shall bury. Now Joseph, notice Mark will tell us here, he is a respected member of the council. Now, whether it was pressure in the council, whether it was he also felt that way or thought that way, we are not told. But very clearly, he is a member. And earlier on, Mark had told us all the members were assembled, and Mark had also told us all of them condemned him as deserving death. That's why I would like to believe only Mark has got these words, went boldly to Pilate. On the surface level, it could mean that he is showing he's on the side of Jesus and therefore going boldly to Pilate, because Pilate may have questioned him also. So that's why also boldly. But it seems in the Markan context, the reason for mentioning boldly is because he had now a change of heart. He had a change of mind. He realized that he had made a mistake, and now there is repentance on his part. And Pilate is quite stunned because he had been dead for some time, he was told, because very often a person crucified would linger because this desire for life is so great, and that's why they would break the legs to hasten the death. But then he realizes from the centurion, and the centurion had seen the death and had heard the loud cry, and then he grants the body. Notice Mark uses the term corpse to indicate that Jesus has truly died. Joseph then brings the linen cloth, takes the body down, wraps it. No mention of spices is mentioned by Mark at all. Notice, and therefore some think that this was not the proper Jewish burial which Jesus was given. However, we remember in Mark 14, 3-9, Mark had interpreted the anointing by the woman as a preparation for his burial. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, only two of the three women named earlier, saw where the body is laid, and this is in preparation for what is to come. And this brings us to the last part of our structure, namely, that is to the tomb. We might remember our structure began with the desert, and I said it ends at the tomb. So when the Sabbath is over, Salome is brought in once again because she was mentioned in chapter 15, verses 40-42, as one of the three women who were named. And the women want to go after the Sabbath so that they don't break the Sabbath in order to anoint the body. They were unaware that the woman had anointed the body in the house of Simon the leper. So very early on Sunday, they go to the tomb. So the slicing of the sun, Mark's gospel seems to indicate that Jesus had risen, and this is possibly why Mark mentions. John chapter 20, verses 1 to 10, will not tell us at what time it was of the day. John will only tell us early, no, early on the first day of the week. That's all. Why does John say that early on the first day of the week? Because as far as John is concerned, it will remain dark. So John will say it was still dark. And it might have been afternoon, but it will be dark because Jesus will not be there. So when you read the first line, John chapter 20, verse 1, you already know early on the first day of the week, when it was still dark, that means Jesus is not going to be present because it is dark, and Jesus is the antithesis of darkness, who is light. Here, the sun had risen is possibly an indication for the reader to anticipate that the body will not be there. And so the women who go to the tomb are discussing about how they will be able to anoint the body. But they look up when they go and they see the stone, which was very large. So it's impossible for one person, and Joseph of Arimathea possibly had helped to roll the stone over the entrance of the tomb. And so they see that the stone has been rolled back. And when they enter the tomb, they notice this neaniskos. Not an angel. Mark doesn't mention angelos. He mentions young man. And the young man is dressed in white, sitting on the right side. That is the side of power, the side of authority. And they are alarmed. But he calms their alarm, and he is aware of their alarm when he says that they are looking for the historical Jesus. By the term Jesus of Nazareth, they are looking for the wrong Jesus. As a matter of fact, that is what Mary also does in John chapter 20, verses 11 to 18. She is looking either for the gardener, she is looking for the dead Jesus, and the dead Jesus is not present. So Jesus of Nazareth is not present. He was crucified. He died. He was laid in the tomb, but he is not here. Because now it is not only Jesus of Nazareth, but now it is the living Lord. They become messengers now of the resurrection. Go, tell his disciples and Peter. So Peter denied, but it's forgiven. It's forgotten. He is going ahead of you to Galilee, notice, just as he told you. So in 1428, Jesus had told Peter and the others, I will go before you to Galilee after I am raised. So the young man merely repeats. Now the women, they say nothing to anyone because they are afraid. And the gospel ends there. There are shorter endings and there's a longer ending. But the gospel ends here because the question that many people ask is, if the women said nothing to anyone, how did the message get out? As far as Peter and the disciples are told, they were told by Jesus. The women know because they were told by the young man. Mark knows because he's possibly the interpreter of Peter. But my interpretation is that the reason why Mark has ended the gospel at 16:8 is because he wants the reader to say, now you know, and this is the kind of Jesus which you must proclaim. The shorter ending is only in 2 verses. And according to the first verse of the shorter ending, the women had gone to disciples and Peter and told them. In the second verse, the commission is given to the 11 disciples like it is given in the Gospel of Matthew. So you can see very clearly it's a combination of Matthew. The longer ending even more is a combination of a variety of different texts from the different Gospels. Mary Magdalene is mentioned as if Mark is writing about her for the first time, though he has mentioned her already 3 times. Then why would he tell us now that she of her had cast out 7 demons. So we notice it's very clearly an addition and a reference to Luke chapter 8 verse 2, where we were introduced to Mary Magdalene and told. In chapter 16 verses 12 to 13, the appearance to 2 of them is very clearly a summary of the appearance to the disciples at walking on their way to Emmaus in the Gospel of Luke. The appearing to 11, the combination of Matthew, where he appears to them on the mountain to the 11, and of Luke, where he appeared to them at table. And the proclamation is basically what he gives to them in Matthew. Of course, a few details have been changed. The signs which people will see is a combination of the signs mentioned by John and the Acts of the Apostles. These are the signs. And then the ascension, once again, is what is mentioned at the end of the Gospel of Luke and also of the Acts of the Apostles. And the confirmation is what Hebrews talks about, the confirmation of the signs and the Lord who will confirm those signs. So if we look at each of these verses, verse 11 of chapter 16 is from Luke chapter 24, verse 11. The 2 disciples on the road is a very, very, very brief summary of Luke 24, 13 to 35, the walk to Emmaus. They're reproaching them for their unbelief, is what Jesus does when he appears to the disciples in the Gospel of John, the risen Jesus. The Great Commission of Matthew is also summarized by Mark in verse 15. About salvation and about judgment is taken from John chapter 3, verses 18 and 36. The fact that they will speak in tongues is from the Acts of the Apostles. About being able to handle serpents and drink deadly poison is from the Acts of the Apostles. About laying their hands on the sick who will recover is also from the Acts. Ascension is from the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles. And the final verse is a general summary of the Acts of the Apostles. Brothers and sisters,